Yes, I am a professor studying multiverse theory and universal connections. Specifically, I wrote my thesis on the subject of what we're actually talking about today. Yes. Yes, it's your YouTube channel. Allow me to pull it up. So, what did you want me here for? Ah, I see, okay. Yeah, that should be pretty easy. That's within my purview. It's a good, beginner's intro. May I ask why? That makes sense. And that's semi-consistent with what we've seen so far in the field, actually. I'm sorry, this computer, doesn't seem to want to boot up. Well, doesn't seem to want to boot up Google Chrome. What's the deal with that? I see. Well, there it goes. So we're going to go to youtube.com/Lentlemen Productions. Something like that? Okay. Yeah. Your channel. See, this laptop's already signed in for you.
Finally.
20 subscribers. Very impressive. So the subject is we're going to go to the very bottom and we're going to go by video and explain about each one. That's not about money. So, can I ask you some questions first? Okay, so you're meant to be the real, creator of this channel? I see, okay. Guess that makes sense. And what's with this set? I have to know. Okay. So we're just starting with the first video. Terrible test video 1. It's a short video, we can play it. Oh, that is some visual convention. Yes, okay, so this is, a lot of these videos are real videos. So that's a real video of you testing your voice. Because you are self-conscious about your voice? Something like that, I don't know. Okay. So the first 3 videos here, test video 1, 2, and I Am the World review. Both versions of that are all real videos. And what we see here is a school project originally, that being the review. Neither of which are very good, but for some reason got views. A little bit, 30 and 42 views respectively. And the test videos were test videos before that. So you wanted to make a YouTube channel, but this is what had to give you the inspiration, was a school project? I see. Then we have frogs, a moth, calming waterfall noises, some deer, and okay, then we get into content. So the waterfall noises, deer, moth, and frogs are all canon to most standard universes. So what we're going to see here is they're very vague elements and they exist within the possibility space of any universe. So they could exist in any universe. They're not confirmed to exist in any universe except the ones in which they were recorded, but we can assume that they take place at some point in the possibility space. So if we get the whiteboard here, you'll see we have the real world, and it is a line. The whole past the real world is a line. Okay. Let me adjust this. The real world is a line, okay. And then what you see is with other worlds, this one's just an example, they exist as a space. So you might see something like that, where this is a video. Okay, so right here we basically know what happens. It's got some possibility space, but not much. But everything surrounding the video is all space. It's all possibilities. Okay, and that possibility space could potentially contain any number of things that could be canon. They can be filled in with videos later on, or they can be assumed, they can be headcanoned. Okay, and possibility space exists on multiple levels, but there's your basic explanation. So, if I just grab my eraser here, you'll see that basic like nature videos, they exist all throughout the possibility space of any number of timelines. Okay? Are you sure this whiteboard's large enough? I'm gonna have to erase things as they go on. Okay. You broke Halo Reach. There is an alternate timeline where you broke Halo Reach. It exists as a quasi-possibility space, but we consider it its own timeline. And we don't know much about this except Halo Reach is broken. And this can also exist in possibility spaces. And theoretically it has its own timeline related to the real one. You did not break Halo Reach, so it's not part of the real timeline, correct? Okay. I'm going to skip some of these. You never really played MTG? Never could get a group? Okay. More wildlife. A wolf in its natural habitat is a similar case. It's not really a wolf. Okay, here's the major one. So, these were just examples, so I'm going to replace them with an actual alternate timeline. So, it's called Aborb-Swinkling, something like that. And I'll call that Aborb for now. And that is a choose-an-adventure story. So, yeah, a choose-an-adventure story. It has a highly defined possibility space. So you've got, 5 outcomes, and then they go on from there. And that is a separate timeline that theoretically takes place after the current year in our timeline by 10 plus years. So let's just draw some arrows here. So in 10 plus years is the timeline diversion, if you will. Maybe not the first diversion, but when we start seeing Aborb-Swinkling. And so Aborb-Swinkling exists in the real world. It exists in one of your videos, which is mostly in the real world. And it exists within itself. You can start working on it, and then you'll restart the game if you start working on it. You're playtesting it, right? So, that is meta. Not really. It means that within Aborb-Swinkling is Aborb-Swinkling. Okay, so it comes back here. And within other videos is Aborb-Swinkling. It is not as much of a contradiction as you would think. Think of it as a reflection. So maybe there is a single timeline which exists, and that is Aborb-Swinkling. And then within that there's a reflection of Aborb-Swinkling, which is the same as Aborb-Swinkling, just as a piece of fiction within that timeline. And then in this world, Aborb-Swinkling exists, and it's a reflection of that timeline, or that timeline is a reflection of it, since we can consider the real world to be the realist, and therefore everything else is a reflection of it. Reflections also may exist in other universes. Does that make sense? Okay. Truth.com exists within suspension of disbelief, I'd say. It's not real per se, but it could be real almost. So it's sort of like the Halo thing. So you have truth.gov. There, okay. Now the new timeline. Church video. Now it has a very specific point of divergence. So it's going to diverge maybe here, and that creates a whole new timeline of sorts. Or it's connected there. So, just another church video, traitor to the cause. in that the author insert exists as a pastor of a church, which is currently engaged in an ongoing guerrilla war in the mountains, which are similar but not the same as the mountains where we find ourselves currently. And that guerrilla war is against a large group of banks. And it's highly religious and is based on Emiliano Zapata. Now, can you tell us where Emiliano Zapata came from at all, sir? I see that makes sense, I suppose. Got MLG gaming montage. A lot of these are real. Got real videos that sort of predict the future. You can almost think of them as reflections in a way. That's not Gatorade, it's Gatorade. That is my canon appearance. No, it isn't. Wrong one. Bilson Iankovic's Bad Night, covered by Ian the Boys, is a strange, distorted reflection of a popular pop song that has bled onto your YouTube channel. Yes? And smoking a dollar bill is a strange, distorted reflection of reality. Traders to the car as kid. Curtain Crew Sucks is real documentary work that exists within the potential possibility space of a variety of dimensions, basically anyone where you're in theater that year. Gatorade, okay, so that's not Gatorade, it's Gatorade is a commercial. Both of them are. There's another one similar to that, and you'll see that is, you're sure there's no background noise? Because if there's background noise, it will destroy this video and potentially the continuity. Okay, you're sure? Okay. That's not Gatorade, it's Gatorade. It exists as a commercial. However, it's not a real commercial, it's a faux commercial, if you will. Quasi-commercial, pseudo-commercial, those aren't the right terms at all. So, in that, basically, commercials exist within their own reality, but this isn't meant to, but by the editing, we can tell it's not meant to show the reality of the commercial so much. The reality of the commercial, of any commercial basically, is a reflection of real life. And in that reflection, these people exist and they, for example, drink Gatorade and they'll feel better, right? So it's a distorted reflection that was specifically crafted for a purpose to be shown in reality. So in these, it more shows that process. It's more about the concept of the commercial, not about the commercial's universe. It's about the meta-universe of the commercial. It's about the universe where you would show the commercial, not the universe where the commercial exists as a non-commercial. So, we can assume that also exists in a relatively normal dimension like these, where it's very close, it's very parallel, but it's just not the same details. A murder happens in Quiet Down based off the location that could be related to the church, but we don't have data. The characters are semi-consistent, potentially. We don't have anything against that. Curious Expedition. Curious Expedition. Strong possibility space. There's a modded Curious Expedition playthrough that's incomplete, 32 minutes. And that would exist in the possibility space of the distant, distant past. So if we just draw some dots here. Curious Expedition exists way back here in like the, vaguely I'm going to call it the 1600s. Some of it's from the 1930s. Some of it's from earlier. I'm calling that the 1600s. And we're going to just put quotes around that. So in the 1600s of some universe, the Curious Expedition exists as a possibility space. Because it's a game. So as a game, there's interactivity. And in that interactivity is the possibility space created. With modding, you're in a pseudo possibility space that can only be done by modding the game. So it's not really canon, but it's its own canon in a way. And since it's supported by the game developers through Steam, it's pseudo canon in a way. Very strong emphasis on pseudo. So that would take place in the distant past. Except for some themes, maybe it doesn't really interact with our timeline. Ooh. ASMR POV. You hide in the chicken coop while apocalyptic aliens destroy your home. So, apocalyptic reigns is the key word there. Destroying your home. Now, one might be given to assume this could be a backstory for someone, perhaps the pastor. The pastor sounds like the kind of person who had his home destroyed by apocalyptic rains when he was presumably fairly young, based off of his visual age in the series. So apocalyptic rains. However, the home can be assumed to be the home that we're currently in, being destroyed, to someone with knowledge. So that would either be a character other than the pastor within that universe, such as the character of the intern editor working at the church, potentially having his home destroyed, or that would imply that there was a different home in that universe here, because in the video you can't piece together where that chicken coop is with some vigilance, so you can piece together where this house is. So you know that that home being destroyed is most likely this home. So you would assume there was a different home that was destroyed. And then that radicalized the pastor. In combination with Sweet Mystery. Not quite Sweet Mystery. Sweet Mystery we have very little information on. Could be dimensional. We know from, you have dreams, like the dreams. You write them down? Okay. So we know from the dreams that doors can be dimensional. We don't know what it looks like through one of those doors. Presumably very interesting, based off of the character's reaction. So we don't know about Sweet Mystery, except that it probably shows some kind of dimensional anomaly. Now what that anomaly is, we can't say. Based off the location, it's very likely it's related to the artifact. Very likely. Now, moving on, we have well, I should timeline this out. So we have, down here, we have probably, so on this sort of side timeline, it sort of comes like this. So it also exists in time, but it's also moving across dimensions. And about here, we would have Sweet Mystery, theoretically. I haven't confirmed this, but it looks like that. This is not explicit, it is implied, and it's not necessarily an intended indication. Except we have a tragic assassination. So this, I didn't specify, this is the church timeline here, with the war and everything. So something happens that causes a major timeline split here relating to that dimensional anomaly that creates the twisted church timeline. A tragic assassination. Next video, we have a trio of interesting videos here before we get back to some others. A tragic assassination would be, it's in the church timeline. Probably. Theoretically, it can be slotted into the church timeline or the pre-orbital swing timeline. So it's SS. And there's a couple versions of that. They're interchangeable. They might be reflections of each other. So the A tragic assassination and then the one where it's written like it's sarcastic with random capitals could be reflections of each other that both exist in the possibility space of these timelines, or they both exist, or one of them exists in the possibility space of each. In one, it's an assassination that might lead to the dystopia, spoiler alert, we see in a Borb Sprinkle link. In the other, it would be part of the dystopia of the church timeline. Probably not the cause. Probably that would be a bank official being killed by a church militant, or a church official being killed by presumably somebody being extorted by the bank, based off of what we know. We've got some music here SOHCAHTOA, trigonometric ratios. As far as I know, that video is true in all timelines. It is only known to exist in this timeline. It could exist in the church timeline. Could exist in the pre-abortal swing timeline at the same time. Everything that can exist in reality can probably exist in abortal swing. It can exist in the church timeline, in which case it could be made by the church for the purposes of education. Next up we have JREG Diana Border pitched, delayed, layered, times 5. I don't know why I brought that one up. Next up we have the artifact. The artifact but proper as something in another language that I'm not going to translate because I know you want me to translate it. These are all, in a way, quite literally, reflections of each other. Like, literally, changed the axis. And then one of them is a different take, which is a reflection. The artifact, which I believe you can read, presumably the writing on the CD in the artifact is either old writing, it's in a different language that looks like English, some sort of Simlish that looks similar, or that is what the artifact is. It could be any one of those three, I would say. The artifact, or Sweet Mystery, Through the Door, plus the artifact, if you looked, it seems to be a similar location because it is, equals church timeline. But equals goes both ways. So it's entirely possible that there's a direct reflection. Perhaps one of these videos is a direct reflection going from the church timeline to the real timeline again. So if we were to believe there's a single character, they would presumably go this way, then go that way back by reflecting the same events. Next up, we have one of the few animations on your channel. It's the War NM, standing for animation. Let's watch this one, actually. Try and edit it in if you can. But it should be glitched out again. What? Okay, I think this computer has a hard time. There we go. Man getting snagged by the ocean, they will avenge me. And then soldiers resembling the man, blue eyes and blonde hair, and soldiers resembling the ocean in uniforms, firing at each other with machine guns. Interesting. Now, from what I know of undocumented portions of the church timeline, there is an ocean. There's an entire inland ocean in the mountains. And the bank has territorial control over that ocean. So it's possible it has to do with the bank. It's possible it doesn't. It could be its own separate timeline. Could be Lovecraftian. Do not endorse Lovecraft. But it could be Lovecraftian in nature. The ocean being its own being. We know that Lovecraftian goes very strongly with the bank and with the church timeline. And with the church. It has Lovecraftian undertones, most of them being undocumented. But, so the Lovecraftian concept of an entire ocean sentiently killing someone, and then soldiers of it, I mean, it's not Lovecraftian, but it's, it's a massive unknowable being. Lovecraftian enough for me. That would mean that it exists in that timeline. Now again, we don't have enough information. It's a 13-second animation with lots of looping. So it could not exist in that timeline. Okay. So, for the most part, if it happens in reality, it happens in the other timelines, unless they're entirely distinct, or it's explicitly not. So we have 3 most important how-tos for surviving the Big Rona. And it's how to build a bridge, how to stack firewood, and how to socially interact. The social interaction, to a degree, is accurate. Stacking firewood is accurate, building a bridge, so it's all accurate of how you would do those things, but why are they the 3 most important? Social interaction makes sense. Bartering supplies, and trying to avoid people, doesn't so much. And why would you need firewood as the most important how-to? And why would you need to build a bridge? Presumably, you're traveling new places or the bridge is out. And I believe it is said, and if not, then this is newly documented information, that in the church timeline, the roads in and out of the mountains have been closed off by the bank to contain the war from the feds. So building a bridge could be very important if the bank has destroyed or closed off all the roads. So it could be that. Firewood might also make sense in a more apocalyptic context. It's hard to tell. I think I saw something. No, I didn't. Okay. We have more music. We have ignore this, where someone says, kill myself. Somebody says, where did you get an egg? That is documentation of reality. Slots in anywhere. You don't know what that is. We have, the sequel to A Tragic Assassination and the sequel to The Artifact. Interesting, right? They're reflections. They may both be canon. They may be both impossibility spaces. We have powerful forced being. It's a powerful first being in some timeline. What can I say? Green screen. Interacting with myself, right? I don't know. Snickers commercial. So the original failed Snickers commercial came out. Had to be re-edited. Added a filter to make it brighter and did some other editing. Made it into the successful Snickers commercial. Now, this isn't really documented except for that I just said that they both existed. You wouldn't really know that. So, yeah. They are probably within a single timeline, and the successful Snickers commercial, or failed then successful Snickers commercial come out, successful being a re-edit produced by the Snickers brand using more advertising friendly names. Well, using more advertisable names, not advertiser friendly, they weren't inappropriate names, but using names that just resonate better with the general public and being more well lit, which also adds an interesting filter. So in that universe, Snickers appears to be a leaf, or invisible, or nothing, a spiritual concept. And that would be... that would be interesting. Is that just Snickers advertising, or what? Oh, my bag takes place in reality. Real Slim Shady, but everyone's the master. That's the first music I'm going to mention. Everyone's the master from Doctor Who. Seems like it's the Doctor Who timeline. Slight variation on the Doctor Who timeline. That would presumably be as different from reality as the real Doctor Who timeline is. So it sort of lines up, but it has its own lore. But most of that lore cannot be immediately disproven. So it exists within the theoretical... So there's a theoretical possibility space of things we don't know about the future and about the past. Necessarily. And most of Doctor Who takes place within that. It is only minor variation from current reality to the average human's knowledge, right? You know, it's all secret. Or it's all in the past, or it's all in the future. So, yes, that technically could be true, but we know it probably isn't, is what I'm saying. And I ripped that one from Quantum Reviews. What does that say about the Quantum Reviews universe compared, being related to mine? Nothing, don't bring him into it. But if you really wanted to look into it, technically this is my version of lore, maybe. Delusional gringo counting donations. So, your man is in a Spanish-speaking country, volunteering, counting donations. And all the writing in the background is in English. And he's wearing normal clothes. So, theoretically, I go to Spain at some point. You go to Spain at some point. Snickers commercial, that's right. Thank you for reminding me. So, in the Snickers commercial, I show up. I am the man preferring the Snickers. So in that case, Snickers Commercial, we will focus on the fact that it exists as a dimension because I came from that dimension. I got here through contrivance mostly. It's really hard to harness contrivance, but I got here through that. Successful Snickers Commercial. Yeah, what is there to say? My friend wasn't acting like he is, so I gave him a Snickers. Where I come from, Snickers, it's not exactly good for you. It has some properties that sort of alter how you act. It's sort of like coffee. I'm not sure what's in it, but it's sort of like coffee. So, you eat your Snickers bar, you're much better. It's like coffee, but in a much stronger way, in terms of you acting different. You've seen Snickers Commercial, it's very similar to that. It's kind of disturbing to think that the world I come from is not even a commercial, but a fake commercial on a YouTube video. But that's what I get for studying existential concepts like that. Okay, so, music. Is the music canon? Possibility space. The main one is American Pie and Big Iron and Rasputin in various versions. They each have their own coherent universes that don't overlap very well, as far as I know. They don't all overlap, but they all have their own universes, which would all theoretically, the Tsar has control over Arizona, or the leader, the person in control of Arizona in some way is known as the Tsar, potentially not the Tsar, although that would be somewhat implied, but not necessarily. In terms of timelines, I don't think I brought up something linked. The church timeline is possible. A real-world-like timeline is possible. Curious Expedition? Curious Expedition is very possible, of course, because in Curious Expedition, you can be an explorer from any number of countries, including Rasputin himself, but not the Arizona Ranger, of course. And you can go on expeditions to various locations. So it's theoretically possible that in a version of the Curious Expedition timeline, you go to Big Iron / Rasputin. In terms of that, we got All Time Below. That doesn't imply too much snapback to reality. Doesn't imply that much. Seven Nation Army. Most of these POV videos fit in with me. We have one here called Green Screen, except it's spelled grind screen. Let's watch that real quick. Hey guys, so green screen style I forgot how good that was. It's not that good. So, in the universe, they have green screen style technology, which is debatable if that video was really made with green screen style technology. It says green screen style technology is expensive, but it says, or is it? And it isn't. So, there you go. I think that's all there is to say about that. Except for the fact that I claim to be... sorry, we all look alike, so I just used the first person pronoun. They claim to be Vsauce. Is there a dimension where you become Vsauce, sir? Let's see. The church timeline. Vsauce is run by church. Potentially. You could have church education is possible, but generally they seem to be targeted locally, so it's possible. It's also possible It's existential enough to maybe exist within a sphincter length if it's ever completed. But generally you would say it's its own timeline. Probably in the timeline where the YouTube channel is popular. The character. So in the real realm, YT Pop Vsauce. And this could exist in the future, but I doubt the Vsauce thing will. But YouTube Popular could exist in the future. We'll have to see. Sort of what this video is planning for, isn't it? This video is horribly filmed, let me tell you. I might have to redo the whole thing. My YouTube channel is not that much. Or is it? Hey, Vsauce, Michael here. So, in that case, I have become Vsauce, Destroyer of Worlds. And so, the Vsauce world would have to exist, most likely, well, I said church education, and if it's education going up on this channel, could be Vsauce, is a branch of church education, and it could be that church education is just normal education made for school. How do you tell the difference? It's got the edge to it. Church timeline is edgy. Real world is edgy as well. No, that's not it. So Vsauce exists in the commercial timeline. The commercial timeline is dystopian. The Snickers timeline. The Snickers timeline is dystopian because you live in a commercial, and that's really depressing. If you live in a commercial, then it's run by corporations such as banks. Okay, and if you live in a commercial, then the rules of reality are distorted and Lovecraftian things can happen. Snickers, it's kind of disturbing to think about. I live in the commercial timeline. The Snickers Corporation in the commercial timeline is run by the bank from the church timeline. So the commercial timeline is the church timeline. And in the church timeline, which is the commercial timeline, the rules of reality are created by corporations to a degree. Corporations have ultimate control. Mostly the banks. The banks have control. The banks run Snickers. Snickers is some sort of strange, magical abomination of a corporation that is necessary for humans to function to a degree. I come from that timeline into this timeline. This timeline is close to the real timeline. There's no one there. There is no one there. I am talking to a pillow, a phone. All that exists is my own mental concept of a person who looks like myself in a different costume, in an awkward position, trying to stay on his side of the shot, speaking to me irregularly, and doing an idle animation that can be easily looped while I talk. They don't even exist. But it's not my thought. I am just a character. My creator, the author, is the one who's thinking that thought the same way they're thinking me and acting me for the camera. You have a lot of nights like this when you study existence. So this timeline is the church timeline, but the church timeline is like real life. This timeline is like real life, except distorted in ways. I came from the church timeline, and it's possible that in the future this timeline it is implied that the channel gets popular, but you can't really assume that. So this is a timeline which is like the real timeline, except direct dimensional travel is possible. But there's only one of me in the shot, so is it? At all. I don't know. So, I had this dream, right? This was about 3 years ago. I had a dream 2-3 years ago that really stuck with me. It made me feel emotions. And rare emotions that I don't feel very often. And I said to myself, I want to remember that dream. It felt, the emotions were emotions that I didn't want to forget. In a way, the emotions themselves sort of evolved into a form of almost pseudo-nostalgia, a bittersweet feeling about the very direct past, about a dream that never really happened. So I wrote that dream down. And I wrote down, I think, some other dreams I had that night. And ever since then, I've been writing my dreams down. So, here is the real timeline, okay, for reference. This Sharpie is out. Let's grab a red Sharpie. Red will stand out, surely. I don't know if this isn't a Sharpie. Dry erase marker. Does this work? It does. So, if we imagine the real timeline, and we have sort of 2020, 2021, 2019. The alternate timeline goes sort of the same, except right here. And then sort of right here, probably. And then here is the new part. This is the future. This is all 2020, but it's mainly goes from when things stopped being normal to when they become normal again. That's quote unquote 2020, but in real life it encompasses at least this much as 2021. And this right here I call 2010-10. You see, I put the 10 on the side there. So it's 201 and then a 10 on the side. Alternatively, 21x, or 21 the word 10, or 21 the word 10 sideways. Nomenclature varies. And that is everything that is very similar to if things had not gone weird. So in this universe, there's probably about a year. It's a very irregular year. It's not a standardly defined year, but there's a year where things didn't get weird. Things stayed the same for a while, and things were pretty good for the most part. It's mostly defined by major events, as the real world is defined by major events in its way. And so, there's alternate timelines, though. At some point in this era, maybe earlier, I'd have to analyze more to be sure. You go to the alternate timeline, which I'm just going to write alt now. You go to the alternate timeline a few years ago, and things are different there. It's a darker timeline, in ways not unlike the church timeline. All we have are vignettes, and we have to assemble the vignettes in some way that makes sense. And so, in this timeline, there is a disease, a darkness that is infecting minds, and it causes people to be cruel, exceedingly cruel, and it causes others, in some form, it causes others to accept this, whether this is simply a societal effect, or it's a low stage of some sort of insinuous effects. We're not sure. It could be a virus. It could be a meme. Just a thought virus. It's not clear. And in that timeline, by probably this time, This house is all that's left, to my knowledge. And it's dark outside. And if you go too far into the darkness, it's void and it kills you. And in that timeline, I killed someone in the void, but they came back. And this was unprecedented. It's not clear why I killed them. It's not clear if I was being insidiously affected or I had to kill them because they were being insidiously affected, but I killed someone. And I don't know how they'll feel about that. I don't know how I feel about that in the universe. But that's enough about that timeline. We don't have much time travel, dimensional travel, or subdimensional travel, or simply spatial travel through portals exist. Dreams. So the theory is that this timeline has darkness, and this timeline, our real timeline, has darkness, but this timeline, the darkness is evident. So, for example, through this timeline, I once glimpsed a figure of darkness in a way that would be entirely consistent with me having seen it in this timeline in the morning once. I had sleep paralysis once. And I saw some form of sleep paralysis demon, not the traditional kind, but I was able to get up in the dream and look out the window, and it was a strange thing. I felt I was not meant to see. I felt I was supposed to be asleep, or at least sleep paralyzed at that moment, and so by seeing it, I had made some transgression. And so in that way, it's secret in this timeline. But in the evil timeline, it spreads to people somehow. And it's not such a secret, or it is a secret, but it's obvious to someone from outside the timeline. This timeline also gets pretty dark. There's a war. Fairly limited actual fighting, but lots of time in the military. There's drafts, child soldiers, nuclear war. The entire town is destroyed at least twice, by my estimation, of the timeline. This is assuming it's one timeline, but I generally assume the whole war is with Britain, oddly enough. And I'm not sure if I'm fighting on the right side against Britain, to be honest. But the British don't seem that good either, to be honest. And eventually I get out. The war ends. Unclearly, for the most part. There have been nuclear detonations. I've witnessed a couple. And things are worse than they were before the war, of course. Substantially. Corporations have power. At some point I become a detective. I become a detective perhaps. A scientist of sorts. A studier of things. So at times a detective, at times a scientist, but in a similar way, sort of, you may be asked to be a detective in a case that's in your field as a scientist, we would say. So for example, there's a supernatural case involving occulted children and a Wendigo, primarily over cattle concerns in the mountains. Yeah, that's quite a sentence to say, isn't it? But at the same time, I'm also studying the remains of my own very town that seem to show an apocalyptic event. I don't think the same original one from my childhood in this timeline, but another apocalyptic event after it's rebuilt sometime, presumably due to the war, and the people are left to their own devices in a primitive state, and they fight wars with each other, and I study that. And I'm studying it from outposts, because nobody lives there. It's outposts like Arctic research. At one point I'm involved with what seems to be Arctic research. But I mean, is it what we would call the Arctic? I don't know. And I encounter strange things. You might call them Lovecraftian, I mean. I encounter gods, but isn't any god Lovecraftian in its way? It takes a very strong interpretation to call a god really not Lovecraftian when you think about it. God. So I'm destitute. After the war, before I become a detective, or after the war, after I become a detective, or both, or I'm only being a detective scientist sometimes to pay the bills. I and countless others have been left behind by the upper class, just like real life sometimes. There's violence, lots of violence. As a detective, the way I go from the dream timeline, which is arguably dark, to the darker timeline is simply through a door. I discussed with the porta potty in Sweet Mystery that simply going through a door can take you to an alternate timeline, such as the church timeline, which could it be affected by the way you go into it, perhaps by the artifact, the Linux OS setup CD, unless I'm mistaken. I still have that. So so I go through a door in a normal place, a door that doesn't actually exist, mind you, but that I don't notice that it shouldn't be there, because things seem to change so much anyways in this universe. I go through this door and I find myself in just about where the door would theoretically go if it existed. It doesn't really make sense spatially, but it's basically where the door should go. But obviously in the past, and obviously in a much crueler past. And so, God. So in this timeline, shortly after I become an adult, I end up in the army. And by the time I've left the army, the world is in a darker place. I would argue post-apocalyptic, definitely dystopian. During the war, probably, if not after. Definitely after. And I develop an interest in strange things. I'm a scientist in strange things, a priest in strange, well, not a priest per se, not a pastor for sure, no, but a spiritualist, an investigator, studier of strange things. And there are lots of strange things to study, of course, things much stranger and much more provably strange than those of reality. And I study them, and then probably after that, things continue to decline. Things only go downhill. I only get more poverteous, if you will. Perverse? No. Poverteous is the term I'm going to. I go deeper into poverty. And, well, we'll see from there, won't we? It's possible it's possible that after leaving the army, I go into poverty and I eventually work my way up from my bootstraps doing detective work. It's possible. But in some ways, it fits the specific vignettes more, but it fits the tone less, doesn't it? And that's always the question. There's always a mundane explanation, and there's always a true explanation that feels right. Either just to your mind or to the vibes. So in what I think to be the dark timeline, although I suppose the dark timeline might not even be so much of a timeline. It might be that this simply takes me back in time to here. After all, an outsider can see darkness. What it seems to be with the dark timeline is that I see the cruelty as cruelty because I come from a place where there's cruelty. But perhaps simply going into the past, I can see that. There's not a whole lot of dark timeline information to go off of. But there are strange, dimensional, supernatural, perhaps, forces. And only bad things come out of them. Cruelty. Deaths. Things they keep getting reset. Try and cover this up, perhaps. I have a dream in the dream. And in that dream I and some others go through a portal. And I don't think I'm the person leading it at all. I think I'm just sort of there because I have to be. And we go through the portal. It's a very strange place. And then when we come back, it's not an evil place, I don't think, but when we come back, I wake up in a very real world. I wake up on the toilet of all places. And I'm like, oh, that's strange, I must have fallen asleep on the toilet. And then I have another single vision of that dimension, and then I wake up into real life. I had another dream where I'm with that same group of people in a nearby location, and it's getting dark out. And we're going, and there's danger, significant danger. And this seems to be because we used a power to move dimensionally, supernaturally, temporarily. I imagine it as we're trying to move forward in time, or we're trying to move a certain dimension in time, but we sort of miss. We don't account for how time itself, we don't account for the shape of time itself correctly. And we end up in a world, in a version of the world we don't want to be in, a darker timeline, perhaps. So perhaps there's a link here. Who knows? Perhaps that would imply there's sort of an even. So that would imply the timeline sort of goes like this, and then we accidentally go out here, which is bad. And do we keep going? Do we make it back? I don't know. And I keep talking about cruelty and darkness, and every time, usually as I end my sentence, I think, well, isn't that kind of real, the real world? Wouldn't anyone look at our world and see cruelty, barbarism, and darkness? And it's just under the surface enough to where we don't notice it because we're desensitized, and I don't know. I don't really know. So in reference to the other timelines, the church timeline could definitely be related to the dark timeline of the dreams, but I don't see that connection specifically. In fact, at all, I'd say it seems like they're both fairly felt out as separate timelines. Upward Swingling is mostly its own thing. I think it's based off of some undocumented, some dreams that I never otherwise documented. It's based off of reality, in some parts much more than others. It's based off of some movies and other concepts. I don't really know. What does this tell us about the future? Well, I've been studying these all for a while. Some might say creating in a way. I've spent a lot of time living in a world much like the one that you find yourself in, and well, it's all just a reflection. Nothing is birthed out of, there is no thing out there that is birthed simply on its own. It is all birthed from reality or from fiction, and the fiction itself is birthed from reality or fiction, and eventually it all goes back to reality in one way or another. A distorted reality, a distorted worldview, or a real one. And I don't know what it says that so much of it that seems to be so important is darkness. Everything either fits with reality, or it's a darker timeline. There's no, well, I wouldn't say that. I'd say it's possible that at some point it gets utopian. Maybe. But it doesn't, it takes a while to get there, and it doesn't seem so much like it always. You know, it's all very vague, it's vignettes. So does this just mean that I see darkness a lot? Does this mean that a lot of things in my mind, a lot of things I apply my creative efforts to are war and apocalypse and cruelty, injustice? What's that reflecting? Well, I could start listing, but to the 5 people that see this, and the one of those that isn't me, I think you know. I'm sure we all see. I guess what I'm saying is maybe we live in the dark timeline. What a twist. And request to the theoretical god of this universe that is the editor of this video. Don't bother getting some footage for the other person hosting. Don't bother getting some footage for the host of this TV talk show hosted on my bed. It's fine the way it is. I don't know. You know, you see a lot of these videos online. They start out with some very light-hearted concept, and they come away with a bit of a black pill, a bit of a red pill, a bit of a bread pill, if you will, about the reality of the world. For the record, I support the bread with a B pill as probably the truth. It's probably the pill. You see a lot of these videos where they go in analyzing, I don't know, Sonic or something. They come out talking about existential horrors, or they talk about how dark the world is. And it's kind of funny because they're sort of extrapolating from reality, but they're extrapolating from the work itself, and that's all I'm doing here, and I didn't script this out at all. I just wanted to make a lore movie, man. But, what I'm saying is that was not scripted, and I legitimately just looked at my dreams and at the YouTube videos I make and determined that a lot of them have dark themes, or a lot of them have mysteries that can be looked at as Lovecraftian, and I look at it as Lovecraftian, and I'm the creator. Yeah, let's film the end of this video. Hope the camera doesn't fall down from its precarious perch. Oh, I'm just gonna go grab something real quick. I've got a small collection of items here. Interesting artifacts, if you will. You'll find some of them important. It's only a small set. So, first off, I have the artifact, Linux OS setup. Never got it to work. Question mark, question mark. Office Depot CDR 52x 700 megabytes compact disc. I found this out in the woods. Somebody left it there. Along with a bunch of other CDs, it was the only one that was, I think, fully complete. We didn't damage ourselves when we found it. And the same day we found it, we took it back to the park and we filmed the artifact. That right there is an artifact that I looked for. I think it was me. The church makes Snickers. I was in the Snickers commercial. Twisted version of myself leads to church. So, it was me. I searched for this for years. And finding it gave me access to some great power. And I struggled to explain that power, and it broke me in its way. twisted me. It was a twisted power, I'll say that, probably. Or perhaps I had the darkness within me all along. That was, maybe I had the darkness in me and it just gave me the power and it showed me too much. It also changed my voice from a bad Bernie Sanders impression to my presentation speaking voice to eventually this one, perhaps. Not sure how that voice change happened. It's all possibility space. Relevant to the church timeline is this. It's not a real handgun. It has no trigger, it has no hammer, the cylinder can't rotate. It's held in place with a nail. I got this. Somebody gifted me a holster, just as something to own. I don't own a handgun, but somebody gifted me a handgun holster, and this was in it, and they gave it to me for free. With the holster, I guess. And it was a handgun at some point. It's from probably the 1890s to the 1910s, 20s, I'm not sure. Very late 19th century to early 20th century, Smith & Wesson. As best I can tell, 44 caliber, double action. Theoretically, I know it's appeared in one or two videos. Theoretically, this would be used for communist revolution. Let's see, a theological communist revolution against the bank. In the church timeline, it would be used for general self-defense. I think self-defense, if you ever saw, and you'd have to live in my town to have seen it, a play called Dinner at 8, Dead by 9. This was the handgun used by Eleanor Van Heusen's sister. Carried by Eleanor Van Heusen's sister, and planned to be used to kill Eleanor Van Heusen. But of course, Eleanor Van Heusen died, spoiler alert, from her own poison before that, I believe. Same handgun. I got permission to bring it as a prop, because they needed a prop handgun, and I was like, this would be a much better prop handgun. Relevant to such things is this. This is an award I got, must be 20, 15, 25, 35, something like that, years from now. It's hard to tell. It's an award given, of course, by a version of myself. You see, it's all in gold. It's a little award man thing with a star and a base. And it was given for my work. Presumably my YouTube work. I'm not sure. Perhaps I'll do something else someday. Perhaps the Communist Revolution. Perhaps the Theological Communist Revolution. In the name of Emiliano Zapata. To answer my own previous question, Emiliano Zapata was a Mexican revolutionary. And I read a short children's book about him. Within maybe the day, I think, of filming that. And it was the name that came to mind when I was creating my church, in a way. Perhaps some greater figure that cannot be named, really, and so any arbitrary name will do. Perhaps a figure being made up on the spot, who knows. For this award-winning journalism, perhaps, this award-winning fiction, this award-winning skits, comedy, not really any of those. I can't sincerely believe in most any of those. Maybe comedy skits, but award-winning hardly. I got this. It's hollow base, made out of plastic. Given to me by a version of myself, or someone resembling a version of myself, 15, 25, 35 years from now. That's lore, that's canon, if you were wondering. Now, of course, the reflection, what exists within this video, is a reflection of a piece I got in a more real dimension that was part of the awards for a play I was in. I think everyone got one. Or maybe were they just table decoration? They may have been table decoration, and I just managed to get my hands on one before they were thrown away. Or they may have been given as awards. maybe to everyone, maybe to the best actors. I'm not sure. Those are some essential artifacts, I suppose. The artifact, an award, and a revolver. This is my phone. Most of the videos are recorded on here, or my laptop. Not the same laptop from before. That laptop is owned by the same person whose phone I'm currently using to record this. Yeah. Kind of a weird ending to a video, don't you think? But, to recap, 2 main timelines, lots of possibility space. Most of the videos are kind of free-floating, could exist in multiple places. There's a war, and a bank, and an assassination, and a church led by me, and I became the leader of the church by bringing the artifact through some sort of dimensional anomaly in the porta potty, but this is not word of God, this is only my own interpretation of my work, death of the author. But, there's that. And, oh yes, in one of my music videos, Big Man Rasputin 2.0.0, the intro is Sweet Mystery. It's Sweet Mystery, and then right as it opens the door, it cuts to the music video. And so that sounds pretty dimensional to me. I don't know. I don't know more than you do. By much. And a lot of it's pretty dark. The church timeline is dark. There's a dark timeline, and in that dark timeline there's darker time-space that we seem to enter. Or else that darker time-space is the darker timeline, and we're entering that from reality, but there's no clear indication that at an earlier age I am familiar with this supernatural / time travel, dimensional travel, so it seems like that would most likely be the darker timeline in that case. Occam's razor in a way, but we really don't know. Maybe I'll have some more dreams in the future. You know, it's not like that happens. A lot of my dreams are of very mundane things. A few of my dreams are somewhat bright, and a lot of them are dark. I don't even have a dark life. I have a very privileged life. A lot of my fiction is very dark. It's either void in values, or it's dark a lot of the time. Or it's parody, which in its own way is dark. And it's all about reflections. Things can exist in multiple timelines as reflections of each other. Multiple things can exist within the same timeline as reflections of each other. And so it's all reflections of darkness that I see in the real world. Not on a personal level, but mostly on a societal level. So, yeah. You know the part at the end of the movie? The lore movie? Where they sit down and explain the metaphor of everything, maybe a bit too much? I never learned filmmaking. This isn't a movie. This isn't a lore movie. This hardly takes place within canon. This is self-analysis via the lore. And yes, my dreams are canon, and chances are you'll never get to read them. Ha!